I am Laura Dixon, and you are listening to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast, episode number 73, Purposeful Priorities. Welcome to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast. I'm going to teach you how to get out of your diet brain so that you too can be naturally thin for life. No counting, restricting, or obsessing. I am going to take the mystery out of it for you so that you can become naturally thin starting today. Are you ready? Let's do this. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. I have had this podcast topic on my mind for a while. And for all of you in my Naturally Thin for Life program, we started talking more about this all together this week. And I have already witnessed and heard from so many women that they've had a huge whoa, aha moment. So I wanted to make sure I shared this concept with all of you. And if what I share with you today is something you know is important for you to shift, then make sure you come over to Naturally Thin for Life, and I will really help you implement this change. So the change I'm talking about is looking at the priorities in your life. Think about your top 5 priorities and what they are right now. When you look at both how you spend your time, but more importantly, when two priorities bump up against each other, which one takes precedent? I'm going to share with you my priorities and give you some examples, but first I want you to reflect on what your priorities are. And just focus on the top 5, the first 5 priorities that come to mind when you think about how you spend your time, and when push comes to shove, what priority kind of quote unquote wins out. Here is what I see time and time again when I ask this question. Very commonly, in the top 5 priorities, it looks something like some version of this: job, kids, husband, housework. God and faith or spirituality are sometimes in those top couple of priorities. Dogs, friends, extended family. Those very commonly are in women's top 5 priorities, in some mix, in some order. So again, those are job, kids, husband, housework, God and faith or spirituality, dogs, pets, friends, extended family. Those I see so commonly in the top 5. So if your job is your top priority, what that looks like then is on the weekend, let's say you're not quote unquote supposed to be working, you're not meant to be working, but when push comes to shove and you have a deadline, you will work rather than take care of the house or spend time with your kids or your husband or walk the dogs. How you really know what your current priorities are is not as much about the time you spend, but what happens when two of them rub up against each other, which one wins? I want you to think also about this more on a routine basis. So if your child's school calls and your daughter broke her arm, of course you're probably going to run out of work and go get her. So this isn't for quote unquote emergency situations. This is more of really how you live your life and the priorities for your life on a day-to-day, a week-to-week, a month-to-month, more routine basis. I call these your default priorities because most of us haven't consciously decided what we want our priorities to be. And now, if you're going through this exercise and you're thinking about your priorities and maybe you're starting to reflect on them and you're not sure you love exactly how they are right now and you're judging yourself, the judgment is just a no. This is not a judgment exercise. Judging yourself is not useful here. It's not really useful anywhere, but I want you to just be aware of what your default priorities are. And this is so important for your weight loss journey, and I will share more about why that is in a few minutes. So you have your top 5 priorities. Do you like them that way? Did you decide that was what you wanted them to be, or did you just fall into them? Are they the priorities your parents had, so you took them on as a default rather than you deciding? Are they what our society tells us they should be? And here's the kicker question. Are you on your priority list? Almost never have I done this exercise with my clients, and do they have themselves in the top 5? Almost never. If that's you, how do you feel about that? Do you want it to stay that way? I want you to decide what you want your priorities to be, not out of obligation or shoulds or have tos, or this is just the way it is, I want you to love your priorities. So I'm going to sell you a little bit, maybe a lot of bit, on why you might want to be in your top 5 and why you being your top priority actually enhances, doesn't take away from all of your other priorities. Now, as a side note, when I talk about you being in your top priorities, and I'll share with you what that means for me, where I am in my life right now, I don't necessarily mean, unless you want this to be how it is, getting manicures and pedicures and going shopping and getting massages all of the time. When I think about myself and my top 5 priorities, I actually never get manicures and pedicures. I don't even really like to shop. I get Trunk Club where they just send me clothes, and I don't get massages all the time, right? So that's not necessarily what I mean. If you want it to be, go for it. But I mean more so you being in your top 5 priorities, I mean your emotional health and your physical health. If your emotional health and your physical health are not in your top 5 priorities, sometimes you all think that is too selfish to have yourself top priority. But what I want to offer to you is, what if it is selfish for you to not be in your top 5 priorities? How do you show up as an employee, as a business owner, as a partner, as a mother, as a friend, when you haven't taken care of your emotional and physical health? I know for me as a mom, I get way more frustrated. I get way more annoyed much more easily. I actually get less done in my day-to-day because I'm feeling emotionally unsettled and I don't show up as the highest version of myself when my emotional and physical health are not my top priorities. And when I don't show up as the highest version of myself, I'm robbing this entire world, my clients, my kids, my husband, from interacting with that version of me. And for all of you who believe in God or a higher power, when you put your emotional and physical health in your top 5 priorities, your relationship with God also has you at your highest self. So consider that too. If you are feeling a little uncomfortable or your brain is having a little resistance to those right now, you're right on track. Because for so many of us, this is completely contrary to what we have been taught. I learned through relationships I've had, how I grew up, our society, different religious views that quote unquote good women, godly women, good moms, socially acceptable women put themselves last always. That it is so important to sacrifice yourself for the sake of other people. And that means you are always at the bottom of the barrel, always at the last priority. I want you to just consider that when you aren't in your top 5 priorities, you are sacrificing your highest self that creates the life you want with more purpose and more love and more joy. And then you are robbing everyone else around you from being and interacting with that version of you. So look at your default priorities and consider what you want your priorities to be. Do you want them to stay the same way, or do you want to change them? When you decide what I call your purposeful priorities, so you've looked at your default priorities, now I want you to think about what you want your purposeful, your deliberate priorities to be. You consciously decide, and they're no longer by default. This list you might come up with your top 5 purposeful priorities, it isn't a forever thing. It's a right now thing. This is fluid. I'm going to share with you my current priority list, not for you to duplicate, but for you to consider as you develop your purposeful priorities. And you will notice that my kids are on my top 5 priorities, but I didn't have kids before, so that changed after I had kids. And right now they're a little. So as they grow up and move out of the house and they're at college and they maybe have a partner and they then have kids, they'll still be a priority, but it will look so much different than it does now, with them being 3 and 1 on the way. This list is supposed to change, but it changes when you decide deliberately, when you decide with purpose, thinking about where you want to get to in the next 1, 3, 5 years. Here are my top 5 priorities with where I am right now in my life. Number 1, my emotional health. Number 2, my physical health. Number 3, my business, serving all of my clients at the highest level. Number 4, my kids. And number 5, my husband. And so here's how this looks. Even though my emotional health is at the top, that isn't actually where I spend the most hours, the most time during the week. So I spend more hours working on and in my business than my emotional health, like deliberate time on my emotional health. I spend more hours with my kids than on and in my business most weeks. Now, if something comes up, because your priorities are really where if they rub against each other, what takes precedence, it isn't necessarily time-based. I may spend more time with my kids than on my business. But if I have something I'm really working on, then I may bump my business up as far as hours spent. I spend way more time with my kids, hours-wise, than on my physical health. But again, when push comes to shove, and this past weekend we were away and it was family relaxation time. So it was time to be spending with my kids and my husband, which are number 4 and 5, right? So I still have deliberate time I spend with them, but a tech issue came up in my business. So because it's a higher priority, I took 2 hours and I focused on fixing that issue. Now, because I had already set these priorities, I didn't hem and haw and feel guilty that I was taking time out of time with my kids and time with my husband to fix something in my business. No, right now I love these priorities in my life. Would I have rather not had the tech issue? Yes, that would have been better for me, right? But it came up. And because I knew what were my priorities, I could work through it so much more effectively and efficiently and then get back to being with my kids and my husband way more quickly because I just got to work and I got back to them and I wasn't carrying all this like guilt and shame with me the whole time. Now, I'm actually considering switching some of these up, but this list has really served me in the last few years as I have created and grown my business. When I imagine being 70, my emotional and physical health will probably still be at the top, but the rest will probably look much different. Maybe then it will be my emotional health, my physical health, and my husband will be next, right? My kids might be grown and out of the house and my grandkids might be there, but like on a day-to-day basis, right? It might be just me and my husband hanging out, spending time together. Relaxation, maybe traveling will be one of my top priorities then. So when you are deciding your priorities, you want to get specific as well on what each one means to you. So for my emotional health, what that means to me now is I journal and I coach myself every single day with all of the tools I teach you here, but what we really dive into in the Naturally Thin for Life program. So if you're in the Naturally Thin for Life program, in the Coach Yourself videos, all of those tools I teach you there, I use all of the time on myself every single day. My emotional health also means I acknowledge my emotions and I use the tools to let them come up and go through my body and pass through my body without fighting them. My emotional health also means I get coached myself as a client every single week. Right now, I actually have 2 one-on-one coaches I work with where I'm the client. My physical health, which does intertwine a little bit with my emotional health, but physical health for me right now means I walk every single day. And because this is a higher priority than my kids, again, not because of time, that's really important. But when 2 priorities rub up against each other on the weekends, when it's kind of more quote unquote time for me to be present with my kids, on the weekends, I still always go for a walk by myself. Always. It's glorious. So I may take an hour to go for a walk and then spend the rest of the day with my kids. And I show up as a much calmer, more peaceful mother because I took the time for my emotional health and my physical health. It doesn't even need to be the first thing I do during the day. And then I go play with my kids only once I've done those things, right? Or I go and work on my business only once I've done my physical health and my emotional health. No, it's just on my calendar as a priority. So even if I'm working on and in my business and I'm like, ooh, there's just one more thing I really want to do, but it's the time I had set aside to go for a walk, I will always feel that urge to keep working on my business because I love it so much, but I know how important it is for me to take care of my emotional and physical health because that helps me show up at the highest level for my business, for my kids, and for my husband. So I will step away from my business, even though I still want to keep doing all the things, go for the walk, and then I will come back to it later. So again, whatever your priorities are, it doesn't need to be that those are the first things you do every single day, but when they're just on my calendar and I know I'm going to go for that walk, I'm going to coach myself, I'm going to get coached, and I know that I will honor that, it sets me up for the best possible day, even on my worst days. Physical health for me also looks like sleeping, taking time to relax, whether that's in my business, with my kids, with myself, or with my husband. So some of them can overlap, but I want you to really think deliberately about when they don't overlap, what do you want to take precedent? And physical health also means for me making food that serves me. I actually don't spend a ton of time in the kitchen. An hour a day is like a lot for me. So this doesn't have to be like a laborious process for each of your priorities. So also consider that. Then for my business, what that means is I have dedicated about 45 hours a week where sometimes I get up early to work before my kids get up. And then for about 40 hours a week, we have a nanny that comes to our house while I work. And of course, within each priority, you will have sub-priorities. So for my business, helping my clients is my first priority. That means sometimes that's coaching. Sometimes that's creating this podcast. Sometimes that's writing emails. Sometimes that's creating videos for training. Sometimes that's creating new content in the Naturally Thin for Life program, right? All of those things are all me helping all of my clients. And then I have other priorities like the back end stuff that none of you care about, like bookkeeping and taxes, right? So within my business, I also, of course, have sub priorities. Then with my kids, what that priority means to me is being present with them. That's my top priority for being with my kids. What that means is sometimes playing on the floor, and sometimes I love it and I think they're just like the cutest and I love this game. Sometimes it also means being present with my boredom when we're playing Candyland for the 5th time. So I can be present with all of it. Sometimes being with my kids means doing things I really love, like going to the zoo. It's like one of my favorite things to do with the kids. Or sometimes we might do housework together. My son thinks it's the most fun thing to spray the sprayer bottle and like clean furniture. And did you also notice, side note, housework isn't on my top 5 priority list. But because my emotional and physical health are at the top, our house is quite organized and clean because my mind is clean. Because I take such good care of my mind and my emotional health, it's like my brain can't quite handle a mess for very long, which is funny because I used to be the messiest person. I don't even have to really work at it anymore because it just comes so instinctually with my mind. So I want you to consider when your top priorities are your emotional and physical health, how that will have a ripple effect into every other priority you have. Then with my husband, we spend time together going on dates. Right now, we're consciously doing more of this, spending time together when the kids go to bed. And so you want to just look at your priorities. And again, you want to look at them and look at what you want your priorities to be deliberately with consciousness, not by default. And you want to love your reasons for your priorities. Obligation and guilt are not good reasons. It will only lead to resentment. So decide what you want your top 5 priorities to be and then get specific on what each one means to you now. And if you're here, you're trying to lose weight. Most likely, for almost all of you, right? So if you want to think about being naturally thin and you want the mental freedom that comes with losing weight and keeping it off and it becomes effortless and easy, if your emotional health and your physical health aren't your top 5 priorities, it's going to be really hard for you to get there. And I want you to consider, let's say your job is your top priority right now, kind of just by default, or your kids are your top priority. Maybe it's like job, kids, husband, housework, extended family. Let's say those are your top 5 priorities, and you're not anywhere to be found. Then when push comes to shove and you're trying to make a change in your life, for you, it's always going to be at the bottom of the barrel because you haven't deliberately decided that you belong in your top 5 priorities. And I want you to consider, when you imagine losing the weight, it's no longer something that's on your mind. You're not thinking about it all of the time. How do you then show up in your job? How do you then show up as a partner? How do you then show up as a mother? And how does that all compound and just expand exponentially because you put yourself at the top? So when you decide what you want your top 5 priorities to be, and let's say you decide you want your emotional and physical health to be at the top or even nearer the top than where they are right now, but I really want you to challenge any thoughts that think you at the top is selfish, and that how you at the top could actually be the least selfish thing you do because of how you show up in every other relationship that you have. So when you look at your default priorities and then your list of purposeful priorities, then what happens next is you will have to implement changes to make that happen. This will be super uncomfortable at first, because it's just different and it's unfamiliar to put yourself at the top of your priority list. But imagine your ideal life, your dream life, everything you want in your life 1 year, 5 years from now. How do you get there? Do you get there by you not even being in your top 5 priorities? My guess is no. So aligning your priorities now with where you want to be in the future is the only way to get there. So you want to expect this to be a little bit uncomfortable. The first few times I started telling my husband on a Saturday, hey, I'm going to go for a walk and can you take the kids for an hour? It was super uncomfortable for me because I grew up where it was almost always my mom was on default kid duty almost all of the time because she was the mom. We go to my parents' lake house with my sisters and their families, and I see this in some of them where it's just 100% by default, the woman watches the kids, unless otherwise noted. It's just so ingrained. And so I wonder, maybe they don't care and they like that, but it just seems like it's so by default. And when I was working in my corporate job, twice a week, there was a bar class across the road that I would go to during lunch. I could leave and get back within about an hour and 5 minutes. I had it timed out. It was great. And it was really uncomfortable for me to do that at first because I was taught to believe that your job should be so important. You would never take that time away. I mean, you have to be the most efficient. It's like a badge of honor to work through lunch and you want to be busy all of the time and all of these things. So it was really uncomfortable for me to take that hour and leave. But here's the funny thing about that. I got to work so that I could leave and still get all of my work done. Because I put my emotional and physical health at the top, I became a rock star employee. I got promotions well above people with more experience. I was always rated at the very top. And I know a lot of that is because I actually didn't put my job as the top priority. So ironic, right? I put myself first, which inevitably created my highest self, and my highest self was a killer employee. So expect the discomfort. And one of my mentors says, she says, discomfort is the currency to your dreams, which is so true. Because if we keep doing what is familiar, which right now is your default priorities, then there will be no change. And you might be okay with that. But I know for most of you, especially if you're wanting to lose weight and keep it off and just not even think about it anymore, you probably aren't where you want to be in that journey and maybe in other areas of your life because you don't have the priorities that align with the results that you want in your life. Part of this discomfort of going from your default priorities to your purposeful priorities is learning how to stop fighting with your emotions and to learn the tools to allow them to just pass through your body. We are taught that our emotions, we have two options. We can either react to them or we can bottle them up. But this type of discomfort of deliberately deciding your purposeful priorities require some emotional discomfort because you're changing. And when you learn the tools to allow for emotional discomfort without needing food to distract you, not only is it the key to changing your priorities to create the life you want 1 year, 5 years, 10 years from now, but it is also the same key to becoming naturally thin. This is the exact reason why the vast majority of my clients who become naturally thin, and by naturally thin, I mean they're at the weight they want. There's no mental battle. There's no mental obsession. They have so much mental freedom because they learned how to listen to their body and allow for emotional discomfort, not by reacting to it, not by bottling it up, but by allowing it to just pass through them because they learned that skill. They take on new jobs, their relationships get better, they make way more money, they're working less hours because they learned the skill of allowing their emotions and never needing food to distract themselves from any discomfort. That is the freedom of being naturally thin. So, for more help with this, make sure you come over and join us in the Naturally Thin for Life program, where you will learn how to implement everything I teach you on this podcast and much more, and where you can get all of the support you need to make continual progress and lose the weight for good. So, are you in your top priorities? And are you willing to change your default priorities to your conscious, deliberate, purposeful priorities to create what you truly want for your life and be that example of what is possible for everyone else around you, and to show up always as your highest self and take that version of you everywhere you go? All right, my friends, have an amazing day, and I will talk with you all next week. Friend, if you are loving what you are learning here on the podcast, you have to come check out my Naturally Thin for Life program. It is my on-demand lifetime access program where I teach you brand new concepts not taught here on the podcast. And I will walk you through exactly how to implement all of the tools I teach you here so that they become just a part of you. You will learn exactly how to understand your specific brain and your specific body so that you become naturally thin for the rest of your life and you no longer struggle with your weight. Inside of the Naturally Thin for Life program, you can also receive live help so that you consistently make progress and reach your goal. I will teach you how to accelerate your naturally thin journey in a sustainable way so that the change becomes permanent. The best part is that it's risk-free. You either love it or I will give you your money back. If you are ready to finally be naturally thin for life, join us at lauradixoncoaching.com/work with me. That's LAURADIXON coaching.com, and click on the Work With Me tab. I cannot wait to see you there.